Alrighty, there we go. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Karen.
And I am Brenda Perez.
And we are here from Centro del Pueblo. We will be making our presentation on Latinx immigrants in Humboldt County, historical analysis of Latinx representation. So who is Centro del Pueblo? We are a community grassroots organization that unites various diverse members of the indigenous people from the South and the Latinx immigrant community in Humboldt. With strong historical, social, and cultural roots, we offer a space of empowerment of our community with practices of autodetermination in politics and culture. Our purpose for this presentation is to visualize the components included in the construction of the Latinx representation in Humboldt County. We analyze the use of language in local newspapers as it helped construct stereotypes in our society. And we visualize the impacts and cycles of oppression towards the immigrant community. Our presentation will delineate the following: a timeline of media representation of our Latinx and immigrant community in Humboldt County, a language narrative, Latinx good workers, Latinx illegal aliens and Latinx criminals, cycles of violence and exclusion towards immigrants, and last, our community today in context of the pandemic.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to start with a little bit of background. But first of all, I want to recognize we are in a weird land. We want to acknowledge that, and everybody here is a guest. Let's explore who is the Latinx community as a guest in Wildland. So for giving this background, I find this very interesting. In 1915, the Panama Pacific International Exposition hosted the celebration of the Panama Canal and also the recovery of San Francisco after the earthquake in 1906. Among the exhibits, we found Humboldt County was participating to display information through a bulletin called Potent Facts. And this bulletin established Humboldt has great extent, good lands at fair prices. What Humboldt has not is Chinese or Japanese, Spanish or railroad grants, or serious pests of vegetables or fruits. What Humboldt needs is more capital and more manufacturers, capable, energetic settlers who mean businesses. For going deep into the background and coming into the chronological explanation and development of our presentation, I want to present these documents. One is from the 1937 Chamber of Commerce of Eureka. It's published by the Times Standard and says that that the Chinamen were herded into a warehouse on the Eureka waterfront and banished to the San Francisco Bay aboard two barely worthy steamers. So it's a description of what happened during the infamous Chinese expulsion. So what the Eureka's Chamber of Commerce was proud to point out was the success of its program. They were very proud to announce that there are not Oriental colonies in the entire Eureka, and that they kept established that until 1945. In the right side, you can meet Juan Perez. Juan Perez is an immigrant from Mexico, and he was described in the news as a good worker. He came here in 1948, so he was in the context of this tension after the Chinese expulsion. And so we can see how this ebb and flow of immigrants was a constant and permanent fact of this county.
The timeline that we have here showcases a few articles that we were able to find where a Latinx immigrant community was represented in Humboldt County. Here we start with the homegrown racism in 1982, an article that depicts acts of racism towards minoritized groups in Humboldt County and the the call for persecution of those white folks who were committing these acts. The next article down here is the Latino-themed honor folklore of 1984, where a Latin American club was given the spotlight to inform others of a cultural celebration that will help fund a scholarship program they had. In 1994, we see two articles, one addressing the 15 Mexican nationals arrested in a drug raid in which two suspected drug houses resulted in the surrounding up of 51 undocumented immigrants who were then deported to Mexico. Many of them reported their human rights being violated. The second article, Latinos Denounced Drug Raid, is an article covering a protest that occurred after this raid. This article details 16 folk walking from Arcata Plaza to Eureka through wind and rain. Antonio Miranda, the then chairman of Centro Información Bilingüe y Cultural, stated, we're Latinos as part of this society, and we contribute to this community. I don't want to be presented as a stereotype, as a drug dealer. We are angry about how the media has presented this case. Later, a group rights organization opened in Eureka. And in 1995, an article covered the Latino beauties as they got ready for a beauty contest in the Cinco de Mayo celebration. And in 2006, we saw an article speaking out about the Day Without Immigrants, a protest that was done in Eureka, and many people took part. So much so that some store owners allowed their workers to go to this protest, and that some of them even closed their business as protest. This, of course, was a peaceful demonstration that included families. Maria Corral Rio notes, it is only in recognition of this that we can build solidarity. The scapegoating of undocumented immigrants and relegating them to permanent exploitable labor is racist and the oldest trick in the capitalist book. As these articles show, there are patterns in the racism perpetuated in our immigrant community. Aristotle stated that the rhetoric is an ability in each particular case to see available means of persuasion. Ob 2008 tells us that rhetoric is a symbol of what we portray our reality to be, and this is accurate. An example of this is the American dream. Most of us know this narrative is often portrayed as freedom, equality, individualism, and the pursuit of happiness. The rhetoric that many politicians and other folk use allude to a land of free opportunity that if you work hard, you can succeed. Yet this is absolutely one of the worst lies that could have been told by the United States, because as you can take a look at our history and our present, you quickly come to realize that the United States only truly knows how to exploit those around them. In this presentation, we explore how the rhetoric is used by our legal system has perpetrated the criminalization and dehumanization of our immigrant communities. Although there is a long history of the U.S. conflict with immigration, this of course taking into account that we are on native land, this presentation will address the immigration laws of the 1980s and 1990s, as they set stage for the rhetoric used today. Starting with the 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act that criminalized the hiring of undocumented workers and further facilitated this mistreatment. In 1988, Anti-Drug Abuse Act and the 1990 Immigration Act were both important in that they started the association between immigration and crime. And in 1986, both the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act and the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act significantly altered the definition of aggravated felony, which led to the persecution of many innocent lives. The IIRIRA purposely used the terminology of criminal alienhood that is now used to criminalize and dehumanize the immigrant community. Some effects of this include, but are not limited to, the hunting of our relatives at our borders and purposely wearing them down to near death and death experiences, the targeting, discrimination, and abuse that our relatives as they experience once they are near the states, the rounding up of our relatives, both adults and children, into detention centers that simulate concentration camps, the lack of educational support for our DACA students, and the pushing of assimilation to a country that will never accept you no matter how whitewashed you are, and the constant persecution that leads to chronic stress and trauma in our relatives' bodies and their generations to come. As we think about these things, I would like to give the floor to my partner Brenda as she talks about the cycles of violence and exclusion towards the Latinx.
Karen just explored and described different laws and reforms, and I want to invite you to think the role of newspapers and media in the implementation of immigrant control laws. I want to invite you to explore the use and abuse of language in newspapers and chronicles. I want to invite you to look into sources, original sources. What you can see right now is an analysis of the region made by the California Center for Rural Policy, where it shows the association of terms of terminology. For example, Latinx and immigration is the first place, which you can see in the graphics. Then Latinx and crime is the second largest association in newspapers. And I want to invite you to reflect on the impact that this has when you read a note. We think we established that this association also enhances exclusion. There is a worry of the Latinx community to wanted to improve their image and wanted to go against stereotypes. And this worry is been part of the testimonies in newspapers since the 80s. And this worry, this constant fight of the Latinx population for being well represented has to do also with this other factor that is very, very heavy and loud in the newspapers, as you can see. And Karen talked a little bit about this protest about the drug rate. So the only association in a title, Latinx and drugs rate, make an impact in the viewer, in the person that is reading. If you don't read the entire note, or if you don't go to another sources, you may think that the Latinx has made something related to drug crimes. Exploring this chronology of exclusion, I want to present you the 2000s. We are in the 21st century, and the evolution we analyze in the newspapers is how the association between Mexicans and drug cartel was arising, and it was really present. Even in the same paragraph, you can read 2 or 3 times the same words: Mexican gangs, Mexican drug cartel, armed illegal immigrants, or Mexican gangs, without going further to the facts. I want to invite you to explore not only what this represents in terms of how symbolic is for an entire community to be stereotyped as criminals, but also I want you to explore what is the impact in the streets. So what we have in this note, So Home Confronts Three Migrant Votes, is an example of residents of Garberville getting ready to patrol the streets and going after the so-called tree migrants. But who is a tree migrant? Then you have a racial target over a group. I also want to invite you to explore the definition of terminology such as cartel, because this has been established and it's repetitive in newspapers, but nobody has take the time to define the word. And if we go to the sources, or most academics may think it is a transnational activity. In that sense, it's not accurate just to put a nationality before the word cartel. There is no such a thing as Mexican cartel. There are organized crime groups, but since the drug traffic is an international activity, then there is not such a thing. There is then several national people from around the world internationally participating. What we see here in the cycles of violence and exclusion is deportation as the instrument, as a tool to send this strong message to the Latinx community. We see it in the 90s. We keep seeing it in 2008. Maybe the most traumatic episode in Arcata was the 2008 raid in Sun Valley Farms. This can also be considered as the most organized deportation, because it happened in a facility, in a farm. It happened with the participation of federal agents and local agents. And I want to explore you the symbolism of the pictures. We see brown skinned people affected, but overall we see farm workers affected. These are mothers and sisters and women that were targeted in the place where they work. We also see again deportation 10 years after Arcata, but this time in Fortuna. And again, is the constant cycle of trauma, of applying deportation over a community. We also see in this slide the activism in the streets. So we can start analyzing the reaction. What you see is a rally in the middle. It's a rally against Trump rhetoric, because even if we are after the elections analyzing the so-called victory of the Democratic Party, we still need to work on the rhetoric, as Karen was inviting us. We arrived 2018 and I'm gonna call the end of a cycle of abusive deportation with the sanctuary law in a county level. I think the sanctuary law is a paramount. This is the moment where it's established in the law, voted by the people, and making a reference. This is This is the first in the entire United States going through the ballot. There are other sanctuaries, but this one went to the ballot. So what I wanna explain here is the moment in contemporary history where the activism of the Latinx community decided to put an end of this cycle of the use of deportation as a mechanism of oppression. What I want to show also, checking on the newspapers, is the terminology. As you can see, the officials keep associating us with drug dealers. I want these drug dealers deported. This is wrong. This is absolutely, we just are exemplifying the use of terminology here. Going further in the use of terminology by the officials and why this is important to bring out, it's because even if there is a law, there is still work to implement this law. So this is a call also to the journalists to inform themselves about the law, to inform themselves, a contrast the sources. And what you have in the left is a representative, a supervisors for the first district, making the association between Mexicans and crime. What you see in the right side is also a group of official representatives going against the sanctuary law. And this is not only symbolic, this is not only in the title of the newspapers, this also play an impact in the participation of the community. So these are examples of use and abuse of language and the wrong associations. To make a high contrast between these titles, I want to present you facts. So in all these decades that we have been exploring the newspapers, we have this research made by the California Center for Rural Policy that displayed the drug arrest by race in Humboldt County. Is the same period that we have been analyzing in the newspapers. And during the same period, the facts are that the so-called Hispanics, we call ourselves Latinx, or indigenous from the South, we are not even the second group arrested by race, but yet we are the first group that have been targeted by deportation related to drug crime activities. So go to the sources, please.
Thank you, Brenda. Now, what we would like to talk about today is bring this into the context of the pandemic. As you can imagine, the pandemic has impacted our Latinx community greatly. Not only were we undocumented, have many undocumented families not given a stimulus check, but many of them also do not qualify for unemployment benefits. This leaves many families who were already barely making it day by day, indebted in rent and struggling to feed their families. Many of whom are risking working multiple jobs and increasing their exposure to COVID-19 for them and their families. Not to mention the lack of accountability towards employers who think that because these folks are undocumented, that do not have to protect their workers. The lack of information in our languages also adds to the struggle. And as news about Latinos and COVID surface in the community, we face increased discrimination in our communities.
And this is important, what Karen just said, because there was a title to that associate Latinx and COVID, Latinos and COVID, without exploring the cause of this disproportionate infection. What we hope you can take from this.
We hope that you can take from this is that the language not only helps us communicate, but also helps us form the reality around us. We must be careful as to how we use it. We need to keep fighting to protect our immigrant community locally and federally, and this includes loosening our immigration laws and creating and increasing immigrant worker rights at our very least.
We want also you to reflect on the fact that there is trauma in a largest part of this community in Humboldt County, of this population, trauma that was after the deportation and the use of deportation repetitively as you could see. So this is a call for exploring and engaging for a process for restorative justice in benefit of these families that were affected of cycles of deportation. It's in the recent history, but it's still an open process, and we need to enforce and inform you to participate in that matter. We want you to participate also in the construction of a collective memory. What do we want to establish as a collective inclusive memory? And we want you to do this through an accurate use of language. Being reflective about the sources of information, as I showed you. Please take care about pointing out the use of stereotypes. Avoid by any means to introduce in your vocabulary, for example, cartel, without being reflective, without analyzing the word. There is no illegal human beings, so avoid that use and abuse of language, please. We want to invite you to be participative about what the newspapers published, send letters, make yourself a critical point of view about what's happening, not only with the Latinx population, but with the sources of information.
Thank you all for your time.
Gracias.
All right, so thanks, Karen and Brenda. Let me check something real quick. So I guess a question I have is, what kind of started you guys on this journey of researching about, historic rhetoric in the papers?
Yeah.
You can go first.
Okay. Well, I was interested in exploring the background of my community here, of the population. So I went to the principal archives. I find myself in the Humboldt State University Humboldt room, a good source of information. And then my strategy was especially first going to check what's the inventory, what's the material there. And I discovered this only file called Mexicans in Humboldt. And some of the Latinx have been exploring why only Mexicans, there's people from El Salvador and anyways. So my strategy was to separate that file, to explore and contrast this file with other that was diversity population in Humboldt County. After that, after reading all the notes, I decided to go in the chronology to explore the dates and to explore also what were the main factors. And that's when I found that, for example, cartel or drug deal was incorporated in the 2000s. Before that, there wasn't even a use of this association. That was quite interesting for me.
Okay. And I mean, what was probably the biggest challenge when you guys are working on this research?
Of course, the finding the information. After visiting Humboldt Room, I went to the Humboldt Historical Society, and there is a lot of information, but we find it hard to make a category. We needed to work that, and this is also an invitation for people that's interested in recuperate the collective memory, to go and explore these files and to present some alternatives on how to categorize. For example, there was one file, I'm going to say this, that's named Interesting Things of Humboldt. And then I find that very challenging, let me tell you, because I was there's a certain point of view of a particular person that find it interesting something. So challenges, yes, in the presentation of information. I think it's there. I think it's very rich. I was fascinated by the information, but there is a work to do in terms of organizing and making categories that are more accurate.
Okay. Cool. So let's see. So where do you guys think this is going to go next? Do you guys still gonna do some more research or?
I mean, I think it would be great to be able to keep this information live and for people. As of right now, I don't think we have any like further steps, but I think it'd be great for people who are watching it now and to just showing it and sharing it with other people because it's important information that needs to be set out.
All right. Well, great. Thank you. Thanks
Thank you,
for
Karen. Thank you,
participating.
Katie.
And thank you everyone for tuning in today. Reminder for a recording of this video, you can see it on our Facebook page. You can also see it in a couple days on our YouTube page. And of course, clarkmuseum.org/HHS to catch up on this presentation and other ones that have aired throughout the week. So thanks everyone, and we will see you around. All right, and let me just be sure I get, okay. There we go.